Hey, Emily, it's Dan. Can you hear me?
You are good to go, Dan. We're going to give it a couple more minutes here, and then we'll get started.
No problem.
Thanks for joining us, Dan. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started in just a few minutes here, so hang tight. Thanks for joining us today. We'll get started in just 30 seconds. We're going to give people just 30 more seconds, and we'll get going. All right, it shows 11:01, and I want to get going and respect your time. So thanks, everybody, for joining us today. This is the first of many in a series of coach education. Appreciate your flexibility. I know that we had to change the time here, and so great to see everybody here. We've had Dan with us years ago, and it was amazing, some of the tips and tricks. And so, Dan, no pressure that we're putting on you now, but we really appreciate you joining us and helping out, because I think as we all know, recruiting is a really important tool that we all have to do. And so I'm going to hand it over to Emily Carr, who's new on staff, and she will kick things off officially. So, Emily, all yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. So as some of you know, I'm the new assistant director here. It's been awesome getting to work with you all so far, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do so over the next year and a half or so. Today we have with us Dan Tudor, who's since 2005, he's been a nationally recognized recruiting expert. He and his staff have trained coaches and other athletic departments in advanced recruiting techniques that work with the new generation of student-athlete prospects. Their unique and training gives coaches edge strategies to bring their top recruits through and marketing. So with that being said, we'll hand it over to Dan and he can get started.
Hey, everybody, good to see you. So a little backstory. We did have to switch times around. I was looking at a flight that got switched around about a day or two ago, and I worked with Emily to make sure that I wasn't late. And I thought, I'll land about 15 minutes before we start. It should be enough time, but just in case it's not, I wanted to let you know, Emily. And Emily, in her foresight and good planning, said, you know what, why don't we bump it back an hour? And it was good because I landed 25 minutes after when I was supposed to be here. So it all worked out. So I am talking to you from Houston, Texas. I know there are many of you that are Minnesota Twins fans. You wish the Minnesota Twins were in the World Series, but they're not. My Houston Astros are, and got tickets to Game 1 of the World Series, so I brought my son. We were going to fly in today. It's sort of like rearrange my schedule to make this happen and go to the game. So that's what I'm doing here. But the MIAC and this webinar were important enough that I'm including it in the day. So the other backstory is that to do this, I had to find, first of all, an outlet. The only outlet I could find was in along a wall with those massage chairs that you sit in. You pay $5, you get the half-hour massage mechanical thing rolling down. So again, for the MIAC, I actually had to unplug one of the chairs to plug in my dying laptop so that I could be with all of you. So anyway, great to be with all of you. So we did this last year, and I got actually a lot of good feedback and questions afterwards from all of you, and we're going to put up the information to to see how to contact me after this. But the thing that got mentioned was that last year there was a lot we crammed a lot into one session. So what we wanted to do this year was make it a little bit simpler and sort of talk about some techniques and things that would be easier maybe to implement versus what we did last year. So that's the goal. And what I want to do, if I can bring up my my clip here, is to share this. Okay. So what we wanted to do is to try to stick with some very basic ideas as far as how to go into this year. And you're already into both the class of 2020, and many of you hopefully have started answering questions and interacting with the class of 21. So I want to go through 5 things, and because we're dealing with all different campuses, all different sports, coaching level abilities, and tenures and everything, we have to make this sort of apply to everybody. So as we go through everything, if you have questions afterwards, that is my cell phone number, that is my email. Please feel free to reach out, and explain what your situation is after all this. And can you hear me okay, Emily? You got it? Okay. I just wanted to make sure. The other thing I want to do is that during this session, because we want some Q&A and some feedback, and we can certainly do it just conversationally as we're all here on the webinar. If you also wanted to text me a question, if you didn't want to raise your hand and publicly say, hey, here's what I'm struggling with, how do I deal with this? If you want some anonymity, or if you just want to sort of ask me questions on the fly as we go through the next 20 minutes or so, just text me. And what I'll do is go through and answer those questions by text. And later on, if you want email information, or you have questions about anything, you can interact that way as well. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about as we start off, and by the way, I also should say that many of you on this call are at schools or in programs where we work with you as clients. So there's also that way you can, if you're one of those coaches, you can reach out and we can talk about anything that we talk about here, how it would apply to the recruiting plan that you're already executing together and working with us. But the first thing that I wanted to talk about was evaluating your current list. This is something that we didn't talk about much last year, and it's actually something that doesn't get talked about a lot, because you would think of your list, your recruiting list, as what you come up with during the summer or early in the fall as prospects begin to talk to you and reach out to you and interact, email, text, and you put together that recruiting list. And for most Division III coaches, what they do then is they take that list, and that's the list that they walk through the year with. And sure, names will add on to it, some names will drop off, but the main list stays the same, and that's sort of what you carry through to the end. That's been the traditional way of recruiting. What I'm going to suggest to you is that you look at a consistent and sort of constantly revolving reevaluation of that list. And here's why. What we have seen happen a lot of times is that coaches will start, and I'm just going to throw a random number out. Let's just say 50 athletes on your list for your sport that you have started with. So that's the top of the funnel, if we wanted to use that term. And that's what gets carried through the year. And like I said, some names will add on, so it'll go up a little bit. Other names will drop off, so it'll go down. And you'll maintain list. And what we find that you carry through with is it stays roughly the same. It's the same athletes, and they go through the process. And the athletes are the ones either dropping off or being added because of their interest. It's not normally through the coach or maybe because of what that coach, what he or she is evaluating and looking at their prospect list and saying, we need more of this position, more of this level of quality, and so on. They sort of give up control of that to just the comings and goings of the athlete. What I'm going to suggest to you is this. What we've seen really high-performing Division III programs do is take that beginning list, but then the goal becomes work through that list as fast as possible. In other words, that those athletes, and we'll talk about how to do this a little bit later in this webinar, those athletes should be taken from step one, whatever that is in your program. Let's just say it's filling out the questionnaire, filling out the application to the school, being on campus, whatever your steps are, to go through and go through your process, however you have defined it or whatever it is at your school. And at each step of the way, if they aren't moving forward, if they aren't in your timeline, taking the steps that they need in the time that they need it, that then becomes a reason to take them off the list. In other words, they're showing enough signs of non-interest that you don't want to keep them on the list, because what we see a lot of Division III coaches doing is maintaining that interest in that list and really hanging on to the athletes that they have gotten to know. They've watched them. They may have taken one step, but now they haven't taken the other four, but they did take the one, so I'm going to hold on to them and stick with them. And what we find is that they very clearly, they being the prospects, decide early on, I like this school, I don't like that school. I like this one, I'm going to go forward. I don't like this one, I'm going to slow it down. You as the coach need to make sure that you are that you're getting a good sense throughout the process of what each athlete is going through in terms of their steps. And if they aren't moving forward, take them off the list. In other words, that list of 50 that's given you comfort all these months could be that there really aren't 50 on your list. It could be that there are 25 or 30. Now, that could be fine as well. You may have over-recruited or over-started with that list by adding 50 to it at the start. But the point is, if 50 is sort of the list you need, what we are finding is that very quickly as you get into this point in the fall, most lists aren't accurate. In other words, there aren't really 50 on the list. It could be 20 or 25 or 30. And your job is to figure out which ones are moving forward, which ones aren't moving forward. And it doesn't mean that you stop recruiting them, but you certainly can't count on them as a main part of your active list. And that means that for many of you, I'm going to encourage that you put more names on the list. So what that becomes is actively recruiting and adding to that list and sort of updating that list throughout the process. Which doesn't take a lot of time. You don't have to go out to more tournaments necessarily. There's all sorts of online resources that you have that you can add names to the list, and that though is becoming really key. We're finding in the performance level of recruiting classes in Division III is constantly evaluating the recruiting list and making sure that you're adding names. You as the coach are adding names that you want when you see athletes falling away, so that it doesn't get to be late April, early May, and that initial list of 50 is now down to 6, and you need to sign 7, and you've only signed 3, because that's when the pressure starts, and we find that it's really hard to convert those 6 into all the ones that you need. Start to go for 6 for 6. So that's the thing that we would want you to think about right now at the beginning of the process, is evaluating your list and figuring out a way to take, as names go off, bring more names on so that you never run out of names that are going through the process. If you have questions on that, text me or we'll answer them at the end. Number 2, consistency of your story. We did touch on this a little bit last year, and it prompted a lot of questions around 2 ideas. Number 1, consistency of your story. There's 2 words underlined there, consistency and story. Let me deal with consistency first. As we said last year, and what has always been the case for the last 10 plus years, we've been doing research on how athletes make their decisions. When we ask them, what is it that they need from you, from a coach, in order to make a decision to go to that school? They need that story, and we'll get to that and what that is in a second. But more importantly, or certainly as importantly, is that they need it consistently. They are more and more evaluating coaches that are interested in them on how consistently that coach communicates with them. So for instance, if you're the coach that is okay in recruiting, you send something out for 1 or 2 weeks, and then you take 3 weeks off, and you send a little email out forward, some good news about the school or the program, then you take another week and a half, 2 weeks, and don't hear anything. Don't get your prospect anything to absorb about your program. What the prospect sees from you in their mind is disinterest, because in their world, none of their friends communicating back and forth electronically are acting that way. They're constantly communicating. They're very regularly keeping in touch, getting back. There's this conversation that happens. And even if the recruits are not ready to have a literal back and forth conversation, they are judging you based on the conversation coming out towards them. So what we have had them measure and had them tell us, what is that right amount of measure, or what is that right amount of contact from a coach? What they tell us is every 6 to 9 days, they want something from you, coach, to tell them what it is as a reason or as a motivation for them to be interested in your program. And they're trying to answer 2 key questions. Question number 1 that they're trying to answer in the communication that they read from you is, why should I go to that school, play for you at that program? Why should I go to that school? Why should I play for your program? That's question number 1 they're trying to answer as they read your communication. And number 2, they tell us that they are trying to figure out how or why are you better than my other choices? Because most of those good athletes that you're recruiting, they do have other choices. They're trying to figure out now, how are you better than that other choice? So you think back, just pause here a second, as you're listening to this, think back to what you've been sending your recruits this fall and the response that you've been getting back. Hopefully it's good, but if it's not, what have you been talking about that answers those 2 questions? Why should you want to come here to our school, play for our program? And number 2, why are you better than my other choices? Have you been answering or addressing those 2 key questions and doing it consistently? Because when you do that, even if you're not at the top of their list right away, you become impossible to ignore. And that's what we really want. We need them to slowly attract themselves to your program and you as a coach over time through that consistency. Now, what about the story part of this? The story is really important because we buy things as a culture. We buy everything based on a story. We decide who we're going to vote for based on a story. We decide what shoes we're going to wear based on a story. Hotel chains, car brands, everything that we do is based on the story that we've told ourselves about that product, person, or service. If you're not using something, it's probably because you've told yourself a story that is negative towards that thing. And if you do trend towards that thing, then you told yourself something positive. And somebody else is exactly the opposite from you. Half the country in either, in any case, is probably opposite of you on average. So the story that you have to tell consistently to these recruits is one thing leading to another in the messaging that you send out, so that every 6 to 9 days, every message is connected to each other. In other words, message 1 sets up message number 2, which refers back to message number 3. So you're telling a story in the same way that we'd watch a movie or something on television. You're telling the story about your program and why they should want to be there. It has to be sequential. It has to stick on one topic. If you're looking at it as a movie, one scene of that movie has to play out. And then we're ready to change scenes, we change scenes. So by scenes, I mean, we could be talking about the value of your degree at your specific school. Why is it better than other places that they might be looking at? Not to negative recruit other places, but make the case why it's better there. We might also then switch to back over to the athletics side. And while you're getting your degree, you're going to be playing in these fantastic facilities, and here's what they are, and lead them through a conversation about that facility. On and on and on and on for a long period of time. For instance, the 2021 athletes that you're recruiting, you're going to want to be talking to them now, because a lot of them are setting up or will be setting up soon their spring visits. And take care of those, and then the summer and sort of whittle their early fall to a lot of Division III schools, take their final 2 or 3 and go back to their campuses and figure out what do I like about each one of those schools, and where am I going to buy into that story best? Who am I going to decide to go to? The coaches that wait, and for instance, for the class of 2020, if you have waited until summer or early fall to start your real main contact, what you're probably finding is it's tough to get a hold of kids. It's tough to convince them to come to your school. Why? Because they are already so far along the thought process now with other schools that it's hard to come back all the way to the beginning with your school and give you a shot. So That's one thing that the change in FAFSA has meant for Division III is that everything happens earlier now. And we want you to be on the front edge of that. So how do you convince an athlete? How do you get them interested in your school? You get them interested by telling a story. The story has to have one main theme, a couple of main points, and move on, and then pick it up a couple of weeks, so 6 to 9 days later, a couple of days later. And you do that over and over, little by little by little. There is not one message, one letter or magic email that you or I or anybody on the planet can put together that says, here's this one thing, it explains everything, and now you should want to come here. Many coaches and most admissions departments send that stuff out all the time, thinking that we're going to give this comprehensive view of the school and it's going to be amazing because it's going to outline everything that we have here at the school. And what those admissions departments and those coaches don't realize is that, first of all, the prospects are getting that messaging from everywhere. They're getting that same message from every school about how amazing they are. And it usually comes in short bursts at the beginning of the process and then trails off. What we want you to do is take the opposite approach. If you're listening to this webinar and you want to put this into practice, this is probably the one thing that can do the most to change things immediately for you for these next 2 classes, is start small and very simple, shorter messages told more frequently in an ongoing basis. That's the way to get their attention. So consistency of your story is really, really important. Point number 3 I wanted to make, establishing timelines and, if I expand that out, deadlines. The reason you want to set timelines and deadlines is because it gives context to the story. It gives a sort of a framework for how they want to take in the story. If I knew that I was going to go in and watch a movie and it never ended, I would have a different approach to that movie, and I would know I needed to stay and watch that movie. If I don't know when it ends, then it's harder. So they need to know when the process starts, which is easy to identify usually because you're starting to recruit them. There's that first message that goes out that signals the start of the process. What most coaches fail to do is they fail to say to the prospect, here's when we're going to be ending. In other words, here's the deadline. Now, I could probably do a webinar for the next 4 hours on just this topic. So we're going to have that time. Yeah, you don't want that time. And what I want to do is give you a concept, but at the start say that if you go, and I'll give you the address to our blog, to the podcast that we do, there are other things where we go way in depth into this concept about how to set your timeline and how to establish deadlines, even for Division III schools when you aren't offering athletic scholarships. You maybe don't know what their financial aid package is at this time. That's okay. There's still a way to do this if you're a Division III school. What I will say at the start is that you as a coach sitting there now need to establish when this process ends for the 2020s and even the 2021s. What time of year does that end? At what point do you say this is the latest you can go? Doesn't mean that they have to only decide then, but it means this is the latest it's going to go. So you picture, if you sort of sketch this out, on one side of the page there is the start, and then we go through the process, and at some point it ends. That's the beginning and the end of a process, of that timeline. You have to establish that timeline. You have to define it so that you can then get agreement with the prospect. So we're starting here. It ends over here. Do you feel like you could make your decision within that time frame? They have to tell you yes or no. And if it's yes, great. If it's no, okay, let's stop and figure out why. Can we change their mind? Is it going to be something that they just don't want to do? Maybe that's the first signal that they need to be off that list and we need to replace them with somebody else. So timelines do a great service to you to define definition with the prospects that you're dealing with. The deadline becomes just a natural part of the timeline. The deadline is really just that we are going to go all the way here to the end. This is when we have to know what you're doing. Now, can we ask them sooner? Absolutely. Can they decide sooner than that? Absolutely. And we need to make that clear, but we have to have a deadline. We have to have a point where the movie ends, people walk out of the theater, because what we find Division III coaches doing is, oh, you need a little more time? Okay, go ahead, take more time. That's fine. And it doesn't help you because many times those athletes are looking at you as the backup school, and that's not the way to build a good program. I want you to act and sound and feel like a destination program in the same way that the Division IIs there in Minnesota that you're competing against, you may view them as that destination. Your prospects do too, perhaps. Certainly Division I want you to be in that same category, because the second you say, oh yeah, anytime, we're here, just take your time, we'll wait, the prospects come back and tell us, yeah, when they said that, I knew that they would just take anybody at any time, and I started to question or sort of put a negative value on their program, because if you're going to take anybody at any time, then you're not a priority. If you're willing to walk away from me and I have to make a choice, then it's a little bit different. Now you're a priority. So it's funny, the psychology that works. Many of you are being nice, and in the process of being nice and professional, you're actually hurting yourselves with the prospects who are playing this cutthroat game of your school versus theirs versus the other one, and we need to be in that mix. So this is where we sort of have to take the gloves off and pretend and act and feel like we are that D1 or D2 program. So again, there's going to be a lot more information that we've done on where we can take literally hours or certainly a lot of time helping you establish what that timeline and deadline is, and go into way more detail than we have time for here on this webinar. But I wanted to put it in these sort of critical 5 things for you because it is so important, and we're finding that it has really benefited a lot of coaches that have put it into practice. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was continuing to recruit committed prospects. And I said I had 5 things, I actually have 4 things. I combined the story and the consistency. So this is the last point, and then we'll get to the Q&A. Continuing to recruit committed prospects. This is almost something almost no Division III coach does. The ones here on this webinar, and I know there's at least 3 of you, that you know the strategy behind continuing to recruit committed prospects, why that's so important. Let me explain to everybody else who maybe we haven't done any work with, we haven't been to your campus yet to do a workshop. When you recruit committed prospects, there's 2 definitions of committed: the committed prospect to you and the committed prospect to someone else. So the prospects that commit to you, so let's say you get the message this week from a prospect you really want that, hey coach, I'm coming to your school, can't wait to play in the MIAC, great conference, and they commit. And what do most coaches do? Most coaches say, great, that's fantastic. Just being a little bit facetious, you're going to communicate with them, but you stop recruiting them thinking that they're already committed, so they're not going to switch. And we know that's not true. What I usually say about Division III recruiting is that you don't actually know how well it went for the class of 2020 until August of 2020, when classes start and you get to see who actually showed up to campus to go to those classes. So you have to keep recruiting them. What does that mean? That means continuing to tell your story, not every week, but usually every 2 to 3 weeks, giving them something that says, hey, we know you're still there. We know you could change your mind. And here is, if the message becomes not if you come to our school, but when you come to our campus and our school, and tell them, remind them why they wanted to come there, that the dorms are going to be great, the degree is going to mean this, your role on the team, whatever it is, continue to recruit them, because what we find is that your recruits second guess their decision all the time. They'll commit to you, and a week or 2 later they're thinking, did I do the right thing? Should I have waited longer? Should I have played that other tournament? My coach told me to do this. You know what? I am going to keep it open. Why? Because you're taking them for granted. And the same at Division I, Division II. It works the same way for them. They experience the same second guessing on the part of your prospect. But we're not worried about them. We're worried about Division III and specifically your campus in the MIAC. So I want you to continue to recruit the prospects if you want to hold them. Now, the other side of it is, what about prospects that have committed to other schools? What we would want to do is continue to recruit them with the understanding. And so let's just say that they come in and tell you, hey, coach, I've decided it's going to be between these other two schools here, or I think I'm going to go commit to this Division II school, or I'm going to walk on at this D1. Because many of you are recruiting really good athletes. I know that. And your response should be, hey, prospect, I get it. Fantastic program. Coach Smith over there, he's great. Tell you what I'm going to do is, and I'm okay with that, and I'm going to keep telling you, though, why you, in the end, might want to rethink that and choose us, at least until you sign something or you show up on their campus. And the way I would define it is, and it'll be interesting to see how many of you use this, because if everybody used it, I don't know that it would work very well. But if you use the term that, I appreciate you letting me know where you're leaning at this point, and it's a great school, and I can see why you want to go there, but we're going to, and that's okay with us. We're fine with that. We're still going to recruit you, though. That's the attitude that I want you to have, because a lot of those programs are telling this kid, yeah, we're interested. Don't go. No need to do your other visits. We're interested. And what do they do at the end? Oh, they didn't. They decided not to take that athlete, or the athlete thinks it's between one of these two schools, and I know I'm going to go to one of those two, this D1, or I might settle for this Division II, but all these D3s, I'm out. And they tell you that. Stick with them. Continue to recruit them. And what happens a lot of the time, in January, February, when the dream of Division I, Division II athletics starts to die, what they'll do is, okay, well, I want to play somewhere. Who's still talking to me? Coach, I want you to be the program that's still talking to them. You've made time to sit in on this webinar. That's one of the key pieces of advice I would want to give you, is make sure that you're the one that sticks with them and keeps recruiting. So that is sort of the concept that I want to leave you with, that there is, after they commit, still this process and this role that I would want you to play out with them as one of the schools that's interested. Okay, so my cell phone, my email is right there. Let me just check to see if I don't think we have any on text message. So Emily, I'll throw it back over to you, and you can kind of narrate this last part if there's any questions that I can answer.
Yes, great, awesome. That was fantastic, Dan. Thank you. So coaches and administrators who are on right now, if you all, as Dan said, you are more than welcome to text him any questions you might have. Otherwise, you are more than welcome to use the chat function, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you click on it, it should open up with a box in which you can either type a message to everyone, or you can send it, you should be able to directly send it to Dan. So that is another way to ask a question. Otherwise, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question over the webinar. Other than that, if we're not getting any questions right away, Dan, if you would like to start off by just answering a question or two that you commonly get, I think that would be a good way to start off.
Yeah, so one of the common questions related to this last thing that I talked about, committing or recruiting committed prospects, is how should I, I'm going to take myself off of share real quick. If I'm going to do this, how should I go through and continue to recruit athletes? Because I don't feel like that's something that is ethical, or I don't want to steal some kid that convince them to not go to that school they originally thought of going to and come over to mine. And what we find is that that's not what's happening behind the scenes. They don't look at it as pressure. What we're doing is saying, we're acknowledging that look, you're going to go over to that school, great program, great coach. In other words, we're affirming their choice. We get it why they're leaning at that direction, but let's define it as just leaning. And the reason that we want to define it that way is because what we're trying to kind of remind them of is that they still have room to make a decision. And in fact, many of them do change their mind. They do make decisions that are different. So they'll change their mind. And what we find is that Division III schools say, oh, you're not coming here, okay, goodbye, and move away. And then 2 months later, they look and they say, whoa, they didn't go to that one Division II school. They're ending up at a JC, or they went into that other MIAC school. What the heck? what happened? Well, what happened was what happens with all of us. We change our mind, and we make a different decision. And if you're not there having a conversation with me, I can't make you a part of that decision. It would be great if these kids said 2 months later, hey, coach, I'm rethinking this. Are you still around? Are you still interested? And some of them do. But most of them just say, well, they've stopped recruiting me. It's embarrassing to go back and say, I want to play here, so I'm going to be with this other, I'm going to contact this other low-hanging fruit, this other school that has maintained contact, and see if they're interested in me. So that's one question. I just noticed that we have two chat messages, so I'll get to those since I just finished that. But bottom line is, don't feel guilty or strange about continuing to recruit a prospect, because in their world it's completely normal, and they are going to make this decision that is that is something where they're not going to think twice about changing their mind. And many of you have experienced that. We just want to make sure you stay on the same level and same wavelength as them. All right. So the two questions we have so far is from a coach. What are the best modes of communication? Going back to the consistency in the message: texting, email, phone calls, combination. It is a combination. We did research with the class of 2018. We're in the process of that with the class of 2019, and asked them what are their mixes of communication. And surprisingly, things like email, letters, phone calls, text messaging, all rated about the same. They all rated pretty much equal in terms of the mix that if it was up to the athlete, what the athlete would see from a coach. What got rated the lowest, interestingly, was social media. In other words, they're not using that to make a decision. They like it as a sort of a fun side, but they're not using it as a way to make a decision. So the modes of communication, primarily to tell your story, should be, according to the athletes, emails and letters. Phone calls, very interactive, an important part of the process, but that's not where you want to tell your story, because essentially when you're telling your story, you are selling. You're a salesperson. All of you on this webinar are professional salespeople. That's your job. And so what we don't want to do is sell over the phone, because how many like getting the call from the telemarketer to be sold over the phone? I don't. And we don't want you to be showing up like that, because otherwise they'll see that next time that your phone rings, or that their cell phone rings and it's you, that they'll know what's coming. And I don't want to answer it because I don't want to listen to the 30-minute sales pitch on why their academics are so great. Letters and emails, in their world, that's the appropriate place to do it. And you can come off a little bit more professional, not so sort of in their face with it. Text messaging and phone calls, from a communication standpoint, are meant to be the interactive part of this. That's the conversation that happens. Conversations are different from a recruiting standpoint than telling the story. So you have two different categories it goes into. It's hard communication by letter. They did it in the 1800s, but we don't want to do it now. Text messaging is far more convenient for that. But to tell the story, something that they can read and reread and open again is best. So many of you, if you're using some sort of contact manager, notice that sometimes your prospects will open up an email 6 or 7 times. And you're thinking, well, they're not responding, but why are they opening up the email 6 or 7 times? It's because they're reading your story, and they have to read it again to understand it, and again and again and again. We want to provide that to them. If you're telling me something on a phone call, I'm going to forget almost everything that you said. I won't remember much detail. So it has to be in writing. This is a very written communication culture that you're recruiting, because that's what they have grown up using, is text messaging, which is writing. So it is a combination. Second thing that, just checking to see if we got it. Nope. Okay. Second question. What if you happen to have a top recruit, you've invested a lot of time and set up a reasonable deadline where they have all the financial aid information available, and they don't decide on the deadline you've suggested? Where do you go from there? I will tell you. So in that, that they've also been to campus. You've gone and watched them play. They've met some of your team. There's been a lot more that has gone in before this deadline happens. And now they reach the deadline and they say, coach, I can't tell you yes, I just need more time. What I will tell you, and again, this is where I can go into a lot of detail in some of those other sources that I talked about, But my short answer here is what I will tell you that I will encourage you to do. If you text me and run through that situation, or we're on the phone together, you email me, what my advice is going to be as coach, you politely and professionally walk away. Say, hey, if you can't tell me no or yes now, I get it. So what you're telling me is you don't want the roster spot, and you can still come here as a student, but as far as a team, we're wrapping up recruiting, and we need to go a different direction because there's kids that want to be here. But you're saying you don't want to be here, and well, I'm not saying that, coach, but I can't say yes. Well, then you're telling me no, so we have to move away. But let me know where you go, and good luck. And you walk away. And I say that because, coach, and please listen carefully, they are not coming to your program. They don't want to take you off the list, but they're not coming to play for you there. Now, once in a while, every couple of years, you get the one that because you stuck out and stuck it out and gave them more time, that they actually then show up and end up coming to the school. Absolutely, you're gonna bump into that once in a while, but as a general rule, it's not smart. And what hurts a lot of Division III coaches is that all of these kids are playing you, and they are positioning you versus the other schools they really want to go to, and they don't want to take you off the list because it's fun to be recruited by a lot of coaches, and so we don't want to do that. So I'll keep you on, and I'll tell you you're in my top 5, but you're not really a school that I'm interested in. So my advice in that situation is to say it's been great, thanks, and walk away and stop recruiting them. Even the thing that I talked about, after the fact recruiting, no, you're done. Because the byproduct of that is that there's a ripple effect, and that word goes out to all the clubs and high schools that you have contact with that are right now saying, oh, the coach at that school, nice little program. If it doesn't work out at these other 3, that'd be a nice one to fall back on. They can be your fallback school. I don't want to be a coach at a fallback school. I mean, and if you do, don't change anything. But I don't want to be a coach there. I want to be a coach at a school that people are wanting to come to. And so you can take any Division III program in your sport nationally that you feel is the model, whoever that is. And I will wager you that they're not waiting for commitments. They are deciding who they want. They're deciding what is the process that they're going to go through, and when do you have to make a decision. If you're not ready, that's okay, but we need to move on. And by the way, if you keep that healthy list of 50, if you have a healthy list of 50 or so in that example that I gave, whatever your number is, recruits that are always in, it's much easier to do that. If you've whittled it down and haven't reloaded it and it's now down to 5 or 6 and you need 6 to complete a recruiting class, really hard to walk away from that athlete. So each one of those 4 sections that I went over earlier are all interconnected. They all feed off of and help one another. That's the reason that we want you to set that firm timeline, and also then have more kids that you can come back and recruit. 2 more quick questions, and Emily, I know we're running sort of up against what you had said. Do we have time for that?
Yeah, we've got about 3 minutes left here.
Okay, minute and a half each. They say next question. Many D3 programs have been have lean coaching staffs. What are the recruiting strategies for programs without full-time assistants? In the minute and 10 seconds now that I have to answer that, the job doesn't change. The recruiting responsibilities don't change. There's no easy way to pull off what I've just outlined. You as the single coach have to do it yourself. Now, I will say quickly that as clients, we work with a lot of programs with individual coaches, and one of the reasons they bring us on is because we're a heck of a lot cheaper than an assistant coach to formulate all the recruiting and stuff. So there's that option. But if it was just you didn't want to involve anybody else, what you're going to have to do is the shorter, faster stories for you, I think, work better. That you don't have to produce it for 30 or 45 or an hour and a half and produce this wonderfully worded long message out to a recruit. I just gave a staff, we were at an athletic department doing a workshop, and I gave a staff the assignment that come up with your recruiting message in 10 minutes. In other words, you have 10 minutes to write something about whatever the topic is that we had assigned. Write it, stick to very informal language, and then get it out. You have another 10 minutes to set it up in jump forward or front rush or whatever you're using, and send it out. So that whole task should take 20 minutes. It shouldn't take longer. And that's my short answer. But if you have other questions, we can talk one-on-one. You can just give me an email or a text, and we'll talk about it. Okay, last question. Should phone call be used mainly for relationship building? Absolutely. Just like what I said, we don't want to be sold over the phone. We don't want to be sold, and I think it's bad to try to sell your program over text messaging. I know we've run into some coaches who have taken what they used to email a kid and now text the kid the same thing. It's the wrong language. We don't text message the same way that we email. We don't email the same way that we text. And certainly on the phone, it's different. So phone calls are relationship building, checking in, shorter, more to the point, unless the prospect is driving the decision. Great question, though, because we want coaches to stop selling over the phone. It should be something where it is relationship building. So great question. Emily, I will turn it back over to you, and I'll also put the number back up on the screen just in case somebody wants to access that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us today. We really appreciate you giving us your time, and even with your flight schedule, we appreciate you working us in.
Always great.
Fantastic information. For all the coaches and administrators on the call, we will be sending out the video of our today, and some summary points as well of what Dan had presented to us. And if it's okay with you, we'll be sending that information out as well. And with that brings us to the end of our time here today. So thank you all so much for joining us. Dan, thank you again for everything, and have the rest of your week. Thank you so much.
Thanks.